Have you ever just felt like your own mind was playing tricks on you? And then, suddenly, you realize someone else was actually pulling the strings. I mean, it started so subtly, I almost didn't even notice it at all. But then the whispers began. My name is Evelyn Reed, and for 72 years now, this house, it's been my sanctuary, just tucked away here in the quiet embrace of Willow Creek. Every single morning, I'd wake up to the familiar sound of cardinals chirping right outside my window, that comforting smell of fresh coffee, and just the gentle rhythm of a life, a life that was pretty well lived. I was a retired high school English teacher, perfectly content with my books, my garden, and the frequent visits from my nephew, Mark, and his wife, Sharon. They were, I truly believed, the loving anchors in my world after my dear husband passed away. A real blessing, I often told myself. But then little things just started to shift. It was like this really slow, almost unnoticeable turn of the tide. You know. I'd be in the kitchen, carefully making my morning tea, convinced I'd left my reading glasses on the counter by the window. Yet, moments later, they'd just mysteriously appear, tucked neatly inside the sugar bowl. I mean, how does that even happen? Or I'd recall a very specific conversation with Mark about the old oak tree in the front yard, where we definitely agreed it needed pruning. But then he'd look at me with that gentle, that concerned smile, and he'd say, "Aunt Evelyn, we talked about that last week. We decided it's fine for now. Are you sure you're remembering correctly?" And just like that, a wave of self-doubt would wash right over me, this warm blush creeping up my neck. Of course, he must be right. It had to be me. Age, I'd rationalize. It just happens to everyone, right? Then came the missed appointments. One Tuesday, Dr. Henderson's office called, this polite but firm voice asking if everything was all right. I apologized profusely, utterly bewildered. I was certain I'd marked it on my calendar. I walked over to the kitchen wall where my neatly written appointments for the month hung. And there it was, dentist, 10 a.m., but it was crossed out. Not in my usual blue pen, no, but in a faint black ink like it was an afterthought. My heart, it gave a little flutter, kind of like a nervous bird trapped in my chest. "Oh, Evelyn," I mumbled to myself, "you really are getting scatterbrained." Mark and Sharon arrived later that day, unannounced, carrying this fragrant casserole. "Just thought we'd check on you, Aunt Evelyn," Sharon purred, her voice just dripping with an almost sickly sweetness. "We heard about the dentist. Are you feeling well?" Mark nodded, his brow furrowed with what looked like genuine worry. "You've been a little forgetful lately, haven't you? Maybe it's time we talked about getting you some more help around the house, just to take the burden off your shoulders." The word burden just hung there in the air, light as a feather, yet so heavy with an unspoken weight. I waved them off, insisting I was perfectly fine, just a little busy. But their eyes, lingering on my calendar, made me feel so transparent, like they could see right through my flimsy denials. Like they already knew a secret I hadn't even uncovered yet. And that was simply the beginning, really. The first whisper, the initial crack in what seemed like the perfectly manicured facade of my life. If you've ever felt that unsettling shift, that tiny, insistent voice in your head telling you something is wrong, even when everyone else insists you're just confused, then you understand the cold dread that started to settle in my bones. I desperately wanted to dismiss it. I really yearned to believe them. Because believing them, well, it felt infinitely easier than confronting the terrifying alternative. But the truth, I was about to discover, wasn't interested in being easy. It was interested in being known. And it was waiting, just beyond the edges of my perception, hidden in plain sight, right in the very heart of my own home. The truth, as I suspected, wasn't interested in being easy. Those initial whispers, they actually grew louder, not into shouts, but into a relentless, insistent hum beneath the surface of my days. It felt like I was walking through my own home, but the floorboards were shifting beneath my feet, just enough to make me stumble, just enough to make me doubt my footing. After the dentist's call, I started paying much closer attention. I mean, I tried to be scientific about it, like a detective in my own life. I'd place my keys in the blue ceramic bowl by the door, deliberately, my fingers tracing the rim as a kind of mental note. I'd leave the mail sorted on the hall table, bills stacked separately from junk mail. But the next morning, the keys would be in the sugar bowl again. Or worse, my purse would be open on the kit. Chen counter, its contents slightly askew. The mail, all mixed together, some envelopes oddly creased, as if someone had rifled through them. Each time, a fresh wave of self-doubt would just wash over me. Was I truly that absent-minded? Was this the inevitable slide into what Mark and Sharon called the golden years? But what felt more like a gray, foggy decline to me. Their visits, once a comfort, became just another layer of this unsettling pattern. They started arriving unannounced more often, always with some excuse. Just thought we'd bring you some fresh bread. Aunt Evelyn, or Sharon was in the neighborhood, thought we'd pop in. And during these visits, they'd observe me like too closely. I'd catch Sharon's eyes flicking to my pill organizer, or Mark subtly scanning my desk for papers. Their conversations would inevitably circle back to my well-being. "You seem a little tired today, Aunt Evelyn," Mark would say, his voice so gentle it was almost condescending. "Did you sleep well?" I'd lie, of course. "Like a baby," I'd chirp, even though I'd spent half the night replaying every strange incident in my head. Sharon would add, "Maybe it's time we considered one of those medical alert bracelets just in case you fall, or if you forget to take your medication." A real chill would run down my spine. I hadn't forgotten my medication in decades. But their persistent suggestions, delivered with such loving concern, were beginning to chip away at my confidence. They were painting a picture, a portrait of Evelyn, the forgetful old woman, and they were trying to make me believe it was true. The most insidious part was how they started to isolate me ever so subtly. I'd call my old friend Margaret, planning our weekly coffee date, only for her to sound confused. "Evelyn, I thought you called yesterday and canceled, said you weren't feeling up to it." I hadn't called. I hadn't canceled. When I pressed Margaret, she said, "Oh, well, it must have been Mark. He said he was calling on your behalf because you were resting." Mark acting on my behalf, without my knowledge. Each instance was small enough to dismiss individually, but together they formed this suffocating net, slowly pulling me away from my anchors. I felt like I was constantly on trial, even in my own home. I started writing notes to myself, little reminders stuck on the refrigerator or the bathroom mirror. Keys in blue bowl, mail sorted. But then the notes would disappear or reappear in the wrong place, folded into a book I hadn't touched in weeks. It was a cruel game, designed to make me question my very sanity. The frustration began to build, this hot, angry knot in my stomach. It wasn't just forgetfulness anymore. It was something darker, something deliberate. But who would do this? And why? The thought that it could be Mark and Sharon, my only family, was just too monstrous to fully embrace. Yet it was the only explanation that fit all the puzzle pieces. One Tuesday, a particularly cold and gray afternoon, I was looking for my grandmother's locket. It wasn't valuable in terms of money, but it was priceless to me. A tiny silver heart, engraved with her initials, a tangible link to my past. I kept it in a small velvet pouch, tucked away in my bedside drawer beneath my handkerchiefs. I remembered putting it there clearly after polishing it just last week, but it wasn't there. My heart started to pound. I searched frantically, pulling out every item, emptying the drawer onto the floor. Nothing. Just as a wave of panic began to set in, Mark and Sharon arrived. Again, unannounced. "Aunt Evelyn, is everything all right?" Sharon asked, her voice laced with an almost imperceptible hint of satisfaction. I explained, my voice trembling, about the locket. Mark walked over to the dresser, his gaze sweeping over the chaos of my pulled-out drawers. He sighed, a dramatic, weary sound. "Aunt Evelyn," he said, picking up a framed photo from my nightstand, "are you sure it wasn't misplaced? Sometimes, at your age, things just seem to wander off." He paused, then picked up a decorative box from the very top of the dresser, a box I hadn't opened in years. He lifted the lid, and there, nestled amongst old costume jewelry, was the locket. My locket. My breath hitched. I stared at it, then at Mark, then at Sharon, who was watching me with an expression that was just too knowing, too calm. The locket had been placed in a spot I would never have put it, a spot I hadn't touched in years. It was an impossible misplacement. It was a statement. And in that moment, seeing the quiet triumph in their eyes, the last shred of my self-doubt just shattered. It wasn't my mind playing tricks. It was them. And the cold realization of their calculated cruelty hit me harder than any physical blow. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. The air in my bedroom felt thin, brittle. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the tiny silver locket still clutched in. Mark's hand, his eyes meeting Sharon's in that quick, almost imperceptible glance. It wasn't a look of shared concern. It was something colder, something like a silent congratulation. That was it. The final, agonizing click in a lock I hadn't even known was being set. The realization hit me not like a wave, but like a shard of ice splintering in my chest. They weren't just clumsy. They weren't just dismissive. They were doing this on purpose. "Aunt Evelyn," Sharon's voice cut right through the buzzing in my ears. "Are you all right? You look a little pale." I forced myself to breathe, to keep my face a blank canvas. This wasn't the time for accusations, for the raw, wounded cry I felt rising in my throat. They'd only dismiss it, turn it against me, use it as further proof of my fragility. No, the time for blind trust was over. The time for a mother's hope in her only nephew was shattered. It was time for Evelyn Reed, the retired English teacher, to become a student of a very different kind of text. A text of deceit. "Oh," I managed, my voice sounding distant, even to myself. "Yes, just the surprise of finding it there. Thank you, Mark, for helping me." I even offered a weak, trembling smile. It tasted like ash. Mark, still holding the locket, placed it back on the dresser, not in the decorative box where he'd found it, but casually on the surface, as if to underscore its insignificance. "Any time, Aunt Evelyn, you know we're here for you." They stayed for another half hour, their presence now feeling like a suffocating weight. Every kind word felt like a lie, every gentle touch a calculated maneuver. I watched them, truly watched them for the first time. The way Sharon subtly rearranged a stack of magazines on the coffee table as if tidying, but her fingers lingering, perhaps checking for something. The way Mark steered the conversation, always back to my future, to options, to places with assisted living in their names. My garden, my books, my very independence, they were all just obstacles in their carefully constructed narrative of my decline. After they finally left, the silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was sharp, ringing with the echo of their false concern. I walked back to my bedroom, my legs feeling heavy as if moving through water. I picked up the locket. Its cool metal felt solid, real in my palm, unlike the shifting sands of my reality. I placed it back in its velvet pouch, not in the drawer this time, but in the deepest pocket of my dressing gown, zipped securely. A small, defiant act. That night, sleep wouldn't come. My mind was a whirlwind, replaying every misplaced item, every forgotten appointment, every conversation where their words had twisted into knots of doubt in my head. The crossed-out dentist appointment. The rearranged mail. Margaret's canceled coffee date. It wasn't random. It wasn't age. It was a pattern, a deliberate, cruel pattern. And the why began to emerge chillingly. They wanted control. My house, my savings, my life. They wanted me to believe I was losing my mind so they could swoop in and save me, while actually stripping everything away. The indignation was a slow burn, but it was rising, hot and resolute. I sat up in bed, the moon casting long shadows across the floor. My hands, once trembling, felt steady. If they wanted a game, I would play, but I would play by my rules. I wasn't a fragile old woman. I was Evelyn Reed. I had taught Shakespeare, analyzed complex prose, and dissected the subtle motives of characters for decades. Their script was transparent to me now. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The house was utterly silent. I went to my study, a room I hadn't truly worked in since retirement, now lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. My old desk, piled with unanswered letters and gardening magazines, suddenly looked like a battlefield. I pulled open the top drawer and retrieved a crisp, blank notebook. Then, from the very back, almost hidden, I found a small voice recorder, one I'd bought years ago for a local history project I'd never finished. It was tiny, barely the size of my thumb. As I held it, a spark ignited. This wasn't about shouting or confrontation. It was about evidence. It was about truth. I clicked the record button. A tiny red light blinked once, then disappeared, swallowed by the darkness of the room. My hand didn't shake. My resolve, which had felt so bruised, was hardening into something cold and sharp. They thought I was losing my mind. They thought I was confused. But the truth was, they had just woken me up. and I was about to start documenting every single one of their lies. That cold resolve, born in the quiet solitude of my study, it became my new companion. It wasn't a comforting presence, not like an old friend, no. It was this sharp, vigilant guardian that would just whisper warnings in the back of my mind. The house, once my haven, now felt like a stage where a cruel play was being performed, and I, the lead actress, had to pretend to be someone else entirely. The script they'd written for me, the confused, forgetful old woman, I had to inhabit it perfectly. My first task was that voice recorder. It was barely visible, just this tiny black thumb drive of a device. I spent an hour experimenting with its placement, testing its range. The living room, where Mark and Sharon often cornered me with their concerns, well, it needed coverage. I found a small, antique ceramic bird on the mantelpiece, its hollow base perfect for concealing the recorder. I practiced placing it, pressing the soft click of the record button without looking, then picking it up again, making it seem like a casual adjustment. Every movement was slow, deliberate. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands, surprisingly, were steady. The paranoia was a constant hum. Every creak of the floorboards, every unexpected car on the driveway sent a jolt right through me. I found myself checking locks twice, peering through curtains before answering the door. It was exhausting, this new state of hyper-awareness, but it was necessary. I knew they would try to escalate. They had to push me further down the path they'd chosen for me, and I had to be ready. My meticulous nature, a trait I'd cultivated as an English teacher, the careful annotation of texts, the search for subtle subtext, now became my secret weapon. I started a new journal, not the flowery, reflective kind I used for my thoughts, but a ledger of events. Each entry was dated, timed to the minute if possible. Tuesday, 2:17 p.m., Mark arrived unannounced, discussed memory issues. Sharon moved mail on hall table, observed from kitchen door. I described their facial expressions, their body language, the specific words they used. I drew diagrams of where items had been and where they'd been moved to. It felt clinical, detached, but it was the only way to hold on to my sanity, to prove to myself without a shadow of a doubt that I wasn't imagining things. I also began to conduct small, controlled experiments. I'd intentionally leave a bill, a brightly colored one, in an obvious spot on the kitchen counter, half hidden by a fruit bowl. Then I'd watch. A few hours later or the next day after one of their drop-ins, it would be gone or moved to a different, less conspicuous place, often with a note in Sharon's neat handwriting. "Don't worry, Aunt Evelyn, I paid this for you. Just trying to help out." Each time, my stomach would clench. They weren't just moving things. They were erasing my autonomy, one small, insidious act at a time. And then they'd fix it, reinforcing my supposed incompetence. The terror was real, a cold knot in my gut, but it was overshadowed by a quiet, burning indignation. This wasn't just about my possessions. It was about my dignity, my mind, my very identity. They were trying to rewrite my story, and I wouldn't let them. I knew what I was up against. Not just two individuals, but a carefully constructed illusion, built on their perceived kindness and my supposed vulnerability. One afternoon, I found a new bank statement tucked beneath a stack of old magazines I hadn't touched in months. It was open, and a few transactions were circled in red ink, withdrawals I didn't recognize, small but frequent. My heart leaped into my throat. This was more than misplaced keys, This was financial. Mark had insisted on setting up my online banking, assuring me it would be so much easier for me. He said he'd link it up for quick payments, but I hadn't really understood what that meant. Now I saw it, the small, almost invisible drain. I quickly made a copy of the statement using my old printer, then carefully placed the original back exactly as I'd found it. My hands shook as I scanned the copied page, the numbers blurring for a moment through a sudden film of tears. This wasn't just about control. It was about greed. And that knowledge, that stark, undeniable truth, it solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. The small withdrawals on my bank statement were like tiny paper cuts, insignificant on their own, but when you added them together, they formed a bleeding wound. That quiet resolve I'd found in the study now hardened into something steely, edged with a cold dread. This wasn't just about making me feel crazy anymore. It was about taking what was mine. and the financial evidence felt like the first real proof that could stand outside the shifting sands of my own memory. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened alertness. My voice recorder was always on when Mark and Sharon were around, discreetly hidden. I became a master of casual observation, watching their hands, their eyes, the way they interacted with my belongings. Every visit was a performance for both of us. They playing the concerned family, I playing the slightly bewildered, trusting elder. The strain was immense, a constant pressure behind my eyes. The small transactions kept appearing. A subscription service I'd never heard of, a payment to an online retailer for items I certainly hadn't ordered, a small transfer to an unfamiliar account. Each one was under $50, designed to fly under the radar, to be dismissed as a minor oversight or a forgotten online purchase. But I didn't forget. Not anymore. I cross-referenced every date, every amount with my meticulously kept journal. The pattern was undeniable. The withdrawals often coincided with their visits or immediately after. It was almost as if they were testing the waters, seeing how much they could take before I noticed, and they just assumed I wouldn't. One afternoon, Mark helped me clear out some old files in my home office. He was always so eager to organize things for me. As he sifted through a stack of utility bills, he held up a notice from my internet provider. "Aunt Evelyn," he said, his voice laced with mock concern, "it looks like your internet bill has gone up. Did you upgrade your plan without realizing it?" I shook my head, genuinely confused. My internet was basic. I only used it for emails and a bit of news. He sighed dramatically. "Well, I'll call them for you. You know how these companies can be." He took the bill, folded it, and tucked it into his pocket. Later that evening, after they'd left, something about the interaction bothered me. The bill, it had felt too easy, too perfectly placed. I went to the file cabinet and found my stack of old internet bills. Comparing them, I noticed something chilling. The new bill Mark had shown me wasn't new at all. It was an old one, nearly 6 months old, but with the date deliberately smudged, made to look like a current, higher charge. A fabricated problem, so he could fix it, and perhaps gain access to my account under the guise of helping. The vindication was a cold, sharp blade of truth. They were planting evidence of my supposed confusion, creating problems to solve, all to justify their creeping control. The dread deepened. This wasn't just about small theft, it was a psychological operation. They were manipulating my reality, carefully constructing a narrative of my incompetence, piece by calculated piece. Every helpful gesture, every concerned comment, was a brick in the wall they were building around me, designed to cut me off from the outside world and trap me in their fabricated reality. It was like living in a spider web, each strand too thin to notice until I was completely entangled. I started to check my phone's call history, comparing it to times I knew Mark or Sharon had been in the house alone. There were missed calls from friends I hadn't returned, calls I'd never even seen. It seemed my phone, too, was being quietly managed. Had they been deleting call logs, diverting calls? The thought just made my skin crawl. The unseen hand was everywhere, touching every aspect of my life. One night, unable to sleep, I retrieved the hidden voice recorder. I needed to hear it to make it undeniably real. I listened to a conversation from that afternoon's visit, a mundane exchange about my garden. But then, as they thought I'd stepped into the kitchen for tea, their voices dropped. Mark's words were faint, muffled, but I caught fragments. "Her assets, power of attorney. Just a matter of time." Sharon's reply was clearer, a low, triumphant whisper. "She won't even see it coming." "Just keep planting the seeds, Mark." The recording ended there. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't just about money, it was about my entire life, my future, my very freedom. They were planning to take everything. Those muffled voices, Sharon's chilling whisper about assets and power of attorney, they just echoed in the quiet of my study. "She won't even see it coming. Just keep planting the seeds, Mark." The words solidified the grave reality of their plot, turning the cold dread into a burning indignation. But it wasn't enough to simply know. I needed to act, and I couldn't do it alone. The web they were weaving was too intricate, too carefully laid. My first thought was Martha Jenkins, my dearest friend since college, a retired nurse with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a no-nonsense attitude that could cut through any pretense. She was the kind of friend who would tell you when your dress was crooked and when your judgment was. But approaching Martha, admitting the horrifying truth about my own nephew, it felt like tearing open a fresh wound. It felt like admitting I was, indeed, losing it, even though I knew I wasn't. The thought of confessing my vulnerability, my fear, was almost as daunting as confronting Mark and Sharon. I hesitated for 2 days, the recorder a silent, heavy weight in my pocket, the meticulous journal a constant reminder on my desk. Every time the phone rang, I flinched, expecting it to be Mark or Sharon. Spinning another web of polite lies. The isolation they had cultivated was now a real barrier, making me question if anyone would truly believe me. Would Martha, with all her practical wisdom, just dismiss me like everyone else? But then a memory surfaced. Years ago, Martha had nursed her elderly neighbor through a difficult illness, a situation where the neighbor's estranged children suddenly reappeared, overly eager to help with finances. Martha had seen through them, quietly but firmly protecting her friend until the children retreated. She had an instinct for these things. She had seen the ugliness of human greed and manipulation before. That gave me courage. One evening, after ensuring Mark and Sharon wouldn't be dropping by, I dialed Martha's number. My hand trembled, but my resolve held. She answered on the second ring, her familiar, cheerful Evelyn. Long time, no chat, busy bee. Instantly soothing a part of my frayed nerves. I took a deep breath. Martha, I began, I need your help, and I need you to listen without judgment to something quite unbelievable. I chose my words carefully, not launching into wild accusations, but presenting the facts, chronologically, just as they were in my journal. The misplaced keys, the altered calendar, the filtered phone calls, the small, suspicious bank transactions. I told her about the locket, the chilling revelation in Mark's and Sharon's eyes. Then, with a hesitant hand, I reached for the tiny voice recorder. "And this," I whispered, pressing play, "this is what pushed me over the edge." The recording was faint at first, just the mundane sounds of my living room. Then Mark and Sharon's voices dropped, hushed. Her assets, power of attorney, just a matter of time. And finally, Sharon's triumphant whisper, cold as ice. "She won't even see it coming. Just keep planting the seeds, Mark." The silence in Martha's kitchen after the recording ended was profound. I held my breath, bracing for skepticism, for her to tell me I was imagining things. But when she finally spoke, her voice was low, devoid of surprise, and filled with a quiet fury that mirrored my own. "Oh, Evelyn," she said, leaning across her kitchen table, her gaze piercing. "Bless your heart, you're not crazy, you're being gaslighted. And if this recording is what I think it is, they've just given us the smoking gun." The relief that washed over me was so intense, it almost buckled my knees. It wasn't just validation, it was a lifeline. Martha believed me. She saw it. The weight I'd been carrying alone for weeks, the insidious self-doubt, lifted, replaced by a surge of hope so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice choked with emotion. Martha squeezed my hand. "We fight back, Evelyn, and we start by turning their own game against them, quietly." Her words were a balm to my soul, empowering me with the certainty that I was no longer alone. The fog was finally beginning to clear, and for the first time in a long time, I could see a path forward. Martha's words, "We fight back, Evelyn, and we start by turning their own game against them, quietly," were a balm to my soul. That initial flood of relief, however, quickly solidified into a focused, almost clinical determination. The time for passive observation was over. Now it was about strategic thinking, about setting a trap so subtle, so perfectly aligned with their expectations of my confusion, that they wouldn't see it until it was too late. The anticipation was a humming wire, taut with tension. We spent hours at Martha's kitchen table, maps of my house spread out, diagrams sketched on napkins. Martha, with her nurse's eye for detail and her sharp understanding of human behavior, became my chief strategist. "They thrive on secrecy, Evelyn," she'd explain, tracing a finger across a floor plan. "They need you isolated, and they need you to doubt yourself. We're going to give them what they think they want, but with a twist." Our first step was to upgrade my existing recording setup. My little voice recorder was good, but it was limited. Martha suggested something more robust, something that could capture a wider area, especially the living room and the entryway, where most of their concerned conversations took place. She found a discreet device online, disguised as a common household item, small enough to hide in plain sight. We meticulously planned its placement, ensuring it would pick up every whisper, every calculated word. Then came the bait. We needed something that would force their hand, something they couldn't resist. Martha, with a glint in her eye, suggested the old silver strongbox I kept in my attic. It wasn't truly valuable, mostly old family photos and sentimental trinkets. But to Mark and Sharon, it could be perceived as a repository of hidden cash or unknown assets, the very thing they were after. The plan was simple, yet cunning. I would begin mentioning in a vague, forgetful way that I was worried about the strongbox. "I just can't remember where I put the key," I'd sigh to them, feigning a frustrated frown. "It's so silly at my age to misplace such things." I'd leave the strongbox itself in a slightly more visible, yet still out of the way, location in the attic, perhaps under a thin dust sheet that could easily be brushed aside. The real trap, however, lay elsewhere. Martha insisted that we couldn't rely solely on audio. "Their actions, Evelyn, speak louder than their words," she stated, her voice firm. We researched hidden cameras. Again, Martha found tiny, wireless devices designed to blend into everyday objects. One, disguised as a small, antique clock, would be placed in the living room, subtly angled towards the main seating area. Another, almost invisible, would be near the front door, capturing who entered and exited and what they might carry. We practiced activating and deactivating them remotely, reviewing the footage on Martha's tablet. The thought of it filled me with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The days leading up to the launch of our plan were fraught with tension. Every time Mark or Sharon called, I had to suppress the urge to tell them exactly what I was doing. I had to maintain the illusion, to perform my role as the aging, confused Evelyn. I practiced my sighs, my slight hesitations, the way I'd squint at documents they put in front of me. It was exhausting, this constant acting, but the memory of Sharon's triumphant whisper, "She won't even see it coming," fueled my resolve. We even prepared a decoy document. Martha typed up a fake will, filled with ambiguous clauses and references to a secret trust and undisclosed assets. It was designed to pique their greed, to make them think there was something much larger at stake. I would accidentally leave it out, half hidden beneath a newspaper, during their next visit. It was a risky move, but one we both agreed was necessary to truly expose their hand. "This isn't about revenge, Evelyn," Martha reminded me, her eyes kind but firm. "It's about self-preservation. It's about protecting your autonomy, your life. You deserve that peace." And she was right. This cold, calculating game wasn't about bitterness. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The silence in the house, once filled with their lies, was now charged with my quiet anticipation. The day of the sting arrived, kind of cloaked in a manufactured normalcy. Mark and Sharon called, confirming their usual Tuesday visit, complete with promises of bringing Aunt Evelyn's favorite pastries. My stomach churned, just this knot of dread and anticipation tightening with each passing hour. Martha, ever the steady hand, had helped me activate all the hidden devices that morning. The antique clock on the mantelpiece, it hummed almost imperceptibly, its tiny lens aimed squarely at the sofa. The discreet camera near the front door was ready, and the voice recorder, nestled among a stack of magazines by my reading chair, it just waited. I placed the decoy document, the fake will with its tantalizing hints of secret trusts, beneath a newspaper on the coffee table, just visible enough to catch an eye if one were looking for it. I arranged myself on the sofa, a half-finished crossword puzzle in my lap, playing the part of the serenely oblivious elder. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow, even. This was it, you know. When their car pulled into the driveway, my muscles tensed. The familiar crunch of gravel, the soft click of the gate. They walked in, all smiles and practiced concern. "Aunt Evelyn, good to see you," Mark chirped, extending a bouquet of supermarket roses. Sharon carried a bakery box, its sweet scent filling the air, a stark contrast to the bitter taste in my mouth. They settled into their usual routine. Sharon went to the kitchen, ostensibly to put away groceries, but I knew her eyes would be scanning, checking for things out of place. Mark sat opposite me in the living room, making small talk about the weather, about my health. I responded with my practiced vagueness, my slight hesitations. I watched his gaze drift, almost imperceptibly, to the newspaper on the coffee table. He tried to hide it, but the flicker of interest in his eyes was undeniable. "You know, Aunt Evelyn," Mark began, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Sharon and I were talking. We're just so worried about you handling everything alone. All the bills, the paperwork. It's a lot for anyone, especially now." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. I sighed dramatically, just as Martha and I had rehearsed. "Oh, Mark, you're right. Sometimes I feel like my head is swimming. I just wish." I trailed off, letting my gaze fall pointedly, but not too obviously, towards the newspaper. Mark took the bait. "W. Had is it, Aunt Evelyn? Is there something troubling you?" He leaned forward, his arm casually extending, his fingers brushing the edge of the newspaper. "Oh, just some old papers. I think Arthur might have left some things. A will, perhaps. I can't quite remember where I put the real one, or if there even is a real one anymore." I let my voice sound muddled, uncertain. Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of raw greed replacing the feigned concern. "A will? Well, let me just see here, Aunt Evelyn. Maybe I can help you sort through this." He picked up the newspaper, and beneath it the decoy document was revealed. He glanced at it, then quickly, too quickly, looked at Sharon, who had just returned from the kitchen. Their eyes met, a silent, urgent communication passing between them. Sharon's lips thinned, but there was a hungry glint in her eyes. Mark's gaze lingered on the words secret trust and undisclosed assets. He tried to mask his excitement, but a subtle tremor ran through his hand as he held the paper. This looks important, Aunt Evelyn," Mark said, his voice now a little breathless. "Have you gone over this with your lawyer?" I shook my head, my eyes wide and innocent. "Lawyer? Oh, I don't know, dear. Mark, you usually handle all that for me, don't you?" He faltered for a fraction of a second. "Well, yes, I do help, but this seems like something new, very significant." He exchanged another swift look with Sharon, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then he did it. He subtly folded the decoy will, slid it into a pocket inside his jacket, and replaced the newspaper on the coffee table, all with practiced ease, believing I hadn't noticed. But the camera had, and the recorder had. My heart pounded with a mix of bitter triumph and searing pain. The mask had slipped. The kindness was a veneer. It was all a calculated performance. They thought they were so clever, so invisible in their manipulations, but I had seen it, and now I had captured it. The sting was complete. They left shortly after, making hurried excuses about another appointment, their eyes gleaming with a new, avaricious light. As the door clicked shut behind them, the silence that enveloped the house was no longer one of suffocating dread, but of stark, undeniable revelation. The moment the front door clicked shut behind Mark and Sharon, the manufactured serenity in the house dissolved. The air, once thick with my feigned confusion, now vibrated with raw, bitter triumph. My hands, which had been so steady just moments before, began to tremble as I walked over to the mantelpiece, carefully retrieving the ceramic bird that housed the camera. Then, the voice recorder from beneath the magazines. The tiny red lights, silent witnesses, were a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. They thought they had been so clever, so invisible in their manipulations, but I had them. I didn't wait. Martha arrived within the hour, her face etched with a mixture of apprehension and grim resolve. We sat side by side on the sofa, the same sofa where Mark had played his deceitful act, and I began to play the recordings. First, the audio. Their hushed voices, Mark's barely concealed greed, Sharon's cold certainty. Then the video footage. Mark's hand, so subtle, so practiced, as he slid the decoy will into his jacket. Every careful movement, every telling glance, was captured with damning clarity. Martha watched in silence, her expression hardening with each passing minute. When the last recording finished, she turned to me, her eyes blazing. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low and steady, "this is irrefutable. We have them." The validation was a powerful balm to my soul, a quiet affirmation that I wasn't just sane, I was right. The anger I felt wasn't overwhelming, it was focused, a precise instrument ready for action. The next morning, Martha introduced me to her own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Alina Vance. Ms. Vance specialized in elder law and had a reputation for cutting through complicated family disputes with a clear, direct approach. I laid out my meticulous journal, the original bank statements with the suspicious transactions, the decoy will, which Martha had managed to retrieve a photograph of while Mark was distracted, and most importantly, the audio and video recordings. Ms. Vance listened intently, her gaze unwavering. She didn't interrupt, but I could see the subtle tightening of her jaw, the narrowing of her eyes as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. When I finished, a heavy silence filled the room. "Mrs. Reed," she finally said, her voice calm but firm, "what they have done is a textbook case of elder manipulation and attempted financial exploitation, potentially even fraud." The words, spoken so plainly, cut through the last vestiges of my disbelief. This wasn't just a family misunderstanding, it was a crime. Ms. Vance then outlined our immediate course of action. First, a formal letter would be drafted, informing Mark and Sharon that any previously implied or assumed authority they had over my affairs was formally revoked. This would be sent via certified mail, leaving no room for denial. Second, we would work on establishing a new, ironclad power of attorney, designating Martha as my trusted agent. This would ensure my financial and medical decisions were protected. "We need to secure your assets immediately," Ms. Vance continued, her pen already flying across a legal pad. "We'll freeze any accounts they might have accessed and put safeguards in place. And we'll send a strong, clear message that any further attempts to interfere with your autonomy will be met with full legal action." She spoke of court orders, injunctions, and the serious consequences they would face. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about reclaiming what was mine. Over the next few weeks, the weight slowly began to lift. With Ms. Vance's guidance, I revisited my bank, changed all my passwords, and closed accounts that had shown suspicious activity, opening new ones with strict security protocols. I drafted a new will, ensuring my true wishes were documented and protected. Every signature, every document, felt like a brick being placed in a solid wall of protection around myself. The sense of regaining control was palpable, a refreshing breeze after months of suffocation. The letters were sent. Mark and Sharon's initial reaction was a flurry of angry, defensive phone calls, but Ms. Vance handled them with professional coolness, reiterating the evidence we held. They quickly grew quiet. The threat of legal consequences, backed by irrefutable proof, was a force they hadn't anticipated. They had underestimated me, the quiet English teacher, but they had also underestimated the power of truth, meticulously documented. I wasn't fighting in the shadows anymore. I was standing in the light, ready to reclaim every inch of my life. The process was far from easy, but with each step, I felt a deep sense of healing begin, a quiet strength blooming where fear once lived. The legal storm, once a terrifying prospect, had become a cleansing rain. With Ms. Vance's firm hand and Martha's unwavering support, the formal notices went out. Mark and Sharon tried one last desperate attempt to salvage their narrative, calling with pleas and manufactured tears, but their voices rang hollow now. I didn't engage. Ms. Vance had advised me to let her handle all communication, and for the first time in months, I felt the immense relief of truly setting a boundary. The phone calls eventually stopped. The emails ceased. Their silence, once a tool for their manipulation, became my quiet victory. The house, which had felt like a battleground, slowly transformed back into my sanctuary. It was more than just the legal papers or the lockdown bank accounts. It was a shift within me. I started to notice the cardinals singing outside my window again, truly hear them. The scent of my garden, no longer tainted by anxiety, filled my senses with a renewed vibrancy. I no longer felt the constant need to check locks or search for misplaced items. The gnawing suspicion had receded, replaced by a quiet peace. Rebuilding wasn't just about protecting my assets. It was about reclaiming my life, piece by piece. I reconnected with Margaret, explaining, as best I could, the manipulative web that had been spun. Her shock quickly turned to fierce protectiveness, and our weekly coffee dates resumed, filled with laughter and genuine camaraderie. I even joined a local book club, something I'd put off for years, finding joy in discussions that had nothing to do with my own personal drama. My mind, once consumed by suspicion, was now free to wander through the pages of stories, to analyze narratives not for hidden threats, but for sheer pleasure. I spent afternoons in my garden, my hands in the soil, feeling the earth ground me. Each weed pulled, each new seed planted was an act of creation, a tangible symbol of healing. I wasn't just tending to plants, I was tending to my own spirit, nurturing the resilience that had been buried under layers of doubt. There was a newfound wisdom in me now, a deep understanding of human nature's darker corners, but also of its incredible capacity for inner strength. The emotional scars lingered, of course. The knowledge that my own nephew had attempted to exploit me to strip away my dignity left a permanent mark. But it wasn't a wound that festered. It was a reminder, a quiet testament to what I had overcome. I had faced betrayal, navigated a psychological maze, and emerged not broken, but whole. Stronger. The illusion of my forgetfulness had been shattered, and in its place stood Evelyn Reed, clear-eyed and resolute. I learned to trust my instincts implicitly. That initial gut feeling, the subtle unease that had whispered to me even when logic tried to dismiss it, was my truest guide. It was the compass that had led me through the fog of gaslighting and back to solid ground. The journey had been terrifying, but it had also been incredibly empowering. I had proven to myself that my voice mattered, that my perceptions were valid, and that my inherent worth didn't depend on anyone else's validation. This house, my home, no longer held the echoes of their lies. It held the quiet hum of my own breath, the rustle of turning pages, the gentle murmur of conversations with friends who loved me for who I truly was. The chapter of suspicion and fear was closed, replaced by a profound sense of closure. I was no longer waiting for someone to decide my fate. I was living it, every single day, with a quiet strength that was undeniably, beautifully my own. My life, once nearly stolen, was now fully, gloriously mine. If this story resonated with you, perhaps you've walked a similar path. Perhaps you felt that chilling whisper of doubt, that subtle shift in your reality, engineered by those you once trusted. My journey back to myself was long, and at times, terrifying. But what I discovered was this: your intuition is a powerful compass. When everyone around you tries to convince you that you're losing your way, that tiny, insistent voice inside you might just be leading you to the truth. I learned that reclaiming your peace isn't always about shouting. Sometimes it's about quiet, meticulous action. It's about documenting, about finding allies who truly see you, and about building new boundaries where old trusts have shattered. My silence, once a cage, became my greatest strength, allowing me to observe, to plan, and ultimately to reclaim my own narrative. If you've ever been made to feel unseen, unheard, or as though your sanity was slipping, I hope Evelyn's story reminds you of the immense strength that lies within you. You are not alone in your quiet battles. Your dignity doesn't need permission to exist. Trust yourself, listen to that inner voice, and remember, the truth always has a way of revealing itself, especially when you are brave enough to seek it. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to hear more stories of resilience, of ordinary people finding extraordinary strength, please subscribe to our channel and join our community. Your experiences matter, and your voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening.